wasn't much of a bump back coming out of that. We would expected a much more robust growth, and we still don't have that. So it is prolonged and a slower growth than what we're used to. The surplus you might have seen in the papers was $544 million. It's made up of two really sort of tranches. One was a $310 million revenue surplus. The other was balances that were in the agencies, $234 million. A lot of that was reappropriated back to agencies by the governor. Some of those are local programs under contract to do certain things that are in the book.
The room ain't big enough to get enough chairs.
Surplus is 544. There's a slide. Where did it go? You can see right at the very top, 63 million was in higher education. There was about 84 million in other balances. Part of those 37 were what we call mandatory balances, ones that have to be reappropriated by law. And the other was 47 discretionary balances. Those were all reappropriated. Other big ticket items, revenue stabilization fund, $132 million. That will be deposited in 13. I'll talk a little bit more about the revenue stabilization fund in going forward, because it is one of the things that will come into play in budget development. You'll see water quality fund. The law in Virginia requires that if we have surplus, 10% of that surplus on the revenue side, 10%. Let's take this while they try to fix this thing. 10% on the balance side goes to the water quality fund, is reserved for that. We've got some big ticket items to spend that money on, a 15-year agreement on cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay. Other items in that mix, you will see accelerated sales tax for transportation. When we accelerated the sales tax, which was a revenue policy item that took place a year ago, it also included a portion of the sales tax for transportation. So at the end of the year, we have to return that. That comes into the general fund with the acceleration, and you can see 26 million there. You see a natural disaster reserve. This is for declared natural disasters, earthquake, hurricanes, you name it. We reserve that pretty much up front under our piece of that action. And 17 million is that reserve. You see 8.9 million unemployment compensation trust fund. This is the interest on the borrowings of that trust fund that we owe the Fed. So it'll be another payment next year, lower than the one we made, the 8.9 this year. You see coming down, you see 67 million for transportation. The law also requires, if you come down on a balance and you have sort of an undesignated balance, 2/3 of that go to transportation. 1/3 of it go to what we call a non-recurring fund. So you see 67 million going to transportation, the non-recurring fund 33. Of that non-recurring fund, 7.5 we use for BRAC, that is Oceana Naval Air Station, Virginia Beach, to our share of buying up land within the crash zone. You see sheriffs, 7.4 million. That was a contingent appropriation that was put in by the General Assembly to sort of replace cuts on sheriff's offices. And VRS, which was the governor's intended use of non-recurring. The bottom line here is, once you get through all these numbers, pretty much everything is designated by law or by current policy. So the good news is that you get some money for some of the big ticket items that you need going forward. Bad news is that there's nothing left here to appropriate in terms of the budget. It is spoken for. The one I left out that we're going to get into a little bit was the $30 million for the federal action and reserve fund, or fact fund as we call it. The governor designated that and as part of a strategy to deal with the negative outlook that we face on the bonding front, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. On the indicators, here is the indicators that both national, state, that were built into the budget. You can see we exceeded, for the most part, those indicators in 11, and hence, where we had surplus. The problem is, look at 12. You look at real GDP, 2.7%. And this is the budget as it exists for 12. This is the assumptions in the revenue estimates that were made last year. Most of the data coming out on that would be on real GDP at the stage of the game. And that slide on it, you can see the sort of the from major forecasting companies that houses their prospects of decline over the last 9 months or so from real GDP. Most of them are pegging at 1.3 to 1.6 area at this stage of the game. So clearly a full percent on real GDP. When you look at other indicators, for Virginia employment, 2%, literally that's not happening right now. Probably at least on wages and salaries and employment, about 1% off at the current time on those statistics. So the bottom line here is, even in the official estimate, revenue estimate that's in the budget right now for 12, from the economic standpoint, there would be some peeling back of that. The good news is we start from that higher base from 11. Here's some of the national indicators just to sort of reaffirm where we're at. When you look at real GDP, fourth quarter of 11, first quarter of 12, in fact, that 1% mark, remember we're at 2% in the original assumption. When you look at projections coming out of the major forecasters, whether it's Moody's, whether it's Global Insight, the primary two national forecasting firms, there's a big tail to the downside of everything that they're projecting. The area is on the downside, not on the upside. And even on the downside, there's a 40% chance of double dip. Now, both the Global Insight and Moody's in their projections are very, very close to one another for about 8 or 9 months. And then they start to part at that juncture. Moody's becomes a little bit more optimistic than Global Insight. We subscribe to Global Insight, which sees a more prolonged period of slower growth. Not recession, not double dip. Neither forecast period is doing that at this stage of the game, but slow growth. When you look at consumer confidence, it is the big ticket item. Under the Congress term, this is sort of a current situation as a recession of confidence, and that's probably what it is with all the uncertainty. The business confidence, the consumer confidence is not there to just spark that big turnaround that we would like to see. Job growth in Virginia has been off recently. It's been back basically even in the major metropolitan areas, and our unemployment rate has picked up just a little bit over the recent months. Looking at housing, this would be one of the signs of recovery. Nationally, you see foreclosures down, but you see the initial process of starting foreclosures up. About equal, 30% down on final resolution, about 30% up in initial, which says it's just taking longer to get through the process. So we're going to have more foreclosures throughout the year that shifts downward pressure on prices. Housing is not good in the short run, perhaps a little bit better in the longer run if we can get through the major adjustments. To top it off, if the economics are not bad, then we get to the credit rating in Washington. And you can see here on July 13th, we sort of shot fired the first shot across the bow. I started placing the federal government when we reviewed for a possible downgrade. I got a call from Moody's right before they did that, warning me about Virginia, that Moody's ceased to be directly linked to the federal government. And for all fairness, we have a lot of federal employees, we have a lot of federal establishment in terms of procurement, especially in the things that play in the Virginia economy. And so we are linked to a good deal. The question is, can we survive whatever adjustments might take place at the federal level without major impacts on the Virginia economy. Moody's is more negative on that than I am, but that's their stance, and that's why they gave Virginia a negative outlook. If the battle was over, we did back off the downgrade. The federal government, S&P, did downgrade. S&P is not made a direct linkage between the federal government and state government. So as a result of that, they're more methodically going about evaluating Virginia at this stage of the game. So, and then Fitch on August 16th reaffirmed the federal government's AAA. So that's for the three major forecasters. As I understand it, Moody's is trying to do something by the end of the month on at least some clarification as to where we stand on negative outlook. They have sent us some information just late last week about their analysis for basically not our comment on it, but to verify the numbers that are being so super committee's initial deadline, you all know, is November 23rd, Thanksgiving. Congress has to December 23rd to deal with that situation. So unless there's problem with progress there, I'm afraid that what Moody's might do it if we get our party. We wait with our fingers crossed on that one. In terms of dealing with the negative outlook on bonds, two factors come into play. One is increased liquidity for the state. If everything is very uncertain about the future and certainly the economic impact of defense cuts on the state, then nothing solves that problem like cash in the bank. Gives you flexibility to deal with the kinds of impacts. So at two fronts, we'll move on that. The Revenue Stabilization Fund, I mentioned, $132 million was deposited in 13. At this stage of the game, the deposit in 14 will be at $91 million. That could change. It would change the revenue estimates going into the session. It is quite conceivable with any sort of adjustment in revenues that we can see at the end of 14, about $600 million in the Revenue Stabilization Fund, which means that we would double that from the present size, and right now it's like $300 million over the 3-year period. The other issue was the governor chose to set $30 million aside from the surplus of 11 to start a reserve for the what we call the Federal Action Contingency Fund under VACo Fund, which will be in the budget, probably be in the goods bill as well. But what this reserve was intended to do was provide us cash, at least initially, to deal with some of the things that could come out of Washington in the way of losses of direct federal grants. We're not a big-ticket consumer of direct federal spending. We're 49th per capita in the country on direct. So, and part of that has to do with we run very lean entitlement programs. So we don't get a lot of money from the feds on that note. We would probably have some cuts in public safety and public health that would be hard to live without, many of which flow down to localities that we have to deal with. And this fund would allow us a source of cash to deal with those losses. Also, it would provide an incentive if the feds consolidate facilities. We saw that happen in the last BRAC. When you think about defense in Virginia and BRAC, it doesn't seem like that would be a very good deal for Virginia, but we came out of last BRAC with more military than less because of consolidation. And even in Oceania, for example, where that mostly moved, we made moves to try to buy up land in the crash zone, protect that facility. So there is some necessary cash that's needed when facilities consolidate, whether it's transportation, whether it's issues, whether it's just buying land like we did in Oceania. And this fund will provide a source of cash for those kinds of opportunities should they arrive coming out of the super committee and Congress's action. The other one is for conformity state, both for corporate and personal income. So if feds make changes in federal income tax structure, it'll bleed through to Virginia, most likely. If those are good changes, we conform to them. We have a fixed date conformity where we update every December 31st, so we have a look-see first so it doesn't interrupt our budget as we're passing it. But we catch up to it in a year's time in the federal structure, unless we deconform. In a lot of instances where we deconform, it costs us money. So this would provide a source of funds where we can use for even tax policy if needed to cover deconformity if we want to do that. And then lastly, where we have business, we have a huge infrastructure centered around procurement, professional positions in Northern Virginia, doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs. And that structure would be certainly curtailed if the federal government curtails a lot of procurement. And depending on the nature of where those cutbacks are, it could have a larger or lesser impact on Virginia. So this is just cautionary where we could have a source to turn to if there was alternative markets for current employers in Virginia. If the federal government market dries up a little bit, that we could use to aid them in the transition. So that was the strategy, twofold strategy: reserve on the revenue stabilization fund. That's for a general budgetary shortfall. You can't use it for these other purposes that I've been made. And then $30 million on top of that to deal with some of the specifics of federal cutbacks. In addition to that, the governor created a task force to look longer term at the Virginia economy diversification. So it was a two-pronged strategy: enhanced liquidity, enhanced diversification in the economy to try to deal with this longer term. The good news coming out of 11, with the surplus, even though the current situation is all rocky, is that with that higher base, you don't have to grow as much to get to the budget estimate of 12. So where it was 6% to get to the 12, if you look at this last column, for revenues, it's 3.7%. So about 40% off of what we needed when we first enacted the budget. So the economics can fall somewhat. Coming off that higher base, we've got some room to fall before it becomes a crisis in the budget. And indeed, I think 12 will be, the remaining part of 12 will be fine for the state. As a matter of fact, I think money will roll over into 13. 13 becomes sort of the crunch point in the budget, and I'll talk about that. How are we doing to date on 12? We got a third of the year done, and these are some numbers that I released Friday, coming out of October. The money committees will have their retreats this week and use this information. But the bottom line here, if you look at the raw numbers, is we're running about 2% over where we need to be, 3.7, we're at 5.8 in revenue. But looking at the various sources, here's how it breaks down. On withholding, you see 4.3% versus 3.4%. The 4.3% is a little off of where we were at the fourth quarter of 11. We were tracking about a little over 5% growth in withholding. That's fallen. That's an indication of weakness in the labor markets and picking up a little bit in Virginia. So that's waned a little bit, but we're still running about 1% ahead of the estimate. The non-withholding at 16 is what is really making a difference on the bottom line. The non-withholding, we look at, it's very sensitive. Non-withholding is, other than wages, income, is interest, dividends, rents, capital gains, businesses that you may own that you just don't have a prior income, that you don't have withholding on. So it's very sensitive to movements in the financial markets. And one of the indicators we use to project non-withholding basically is the performance of S&P stock index. If you look at major indexes, yes, up 20%, down 20%, sort of at a loss right now, that fluctuated during the course of the year. And as a result of that, I really don't think taxpayers know where they're going to end the year in terms of some of the non-withholding. So the safe bet to do in that situation is to go what we call a safe harbor, which is pay on last year's tax liability. If you pay that, then you're not subject to interest and penalties. So you get 16%. Our first quarter estimated payment of the year, September 15th, there's about a 16% increase in non-withholding. If that stays the game, you see pretty much here's where we're at year to date. But I think that's tied to last year's tax liability. So if we have losses in the financial market, the question then becomes, do we see that start to shift in January and in May? Do we see refunds of income taxes? We take it in now, we pay that later in the year, then we add to the bottom line later in. We saw that situation in 2002. It is a big concern at this stage again, especially if the economy sort of creeps back towards double dip. The other one that sticks out on this is sales tax. You can see 6% versus 3.4%. On sales tax, basically is buoyed by the unwinding of the sales tax acceleration. The acceleration in 10 brought us $240 million that we moved from July into June in order to get through the budget year. As we begin to unwind it, it doesn't show up in June, it shows up in July. So we unwound $40 million of accelerated sales tax. So that money that would have been collected in June was collected in July. So when you compare July this year to July of the last year, they're apples and oranges. It's about $40 million. So if you look at the raw numbers here, 881, take about $40 million off of that, you're at 841 versus 831. It cuts a lot into that growth. Sales tax, as a matter of fact, is sort of trailing the estimate of the state of the game. And that reflects, to a large extent, just the confidence issue, especially part consumers that I brought you earlier. Bottom line is, once you adjust that accelerated sales tax, we're still up. It's about 1%. If you look down here, rather than 5.8 versus 3.7, it's more like 4.8 versus 3.7. So that's sort of the good news. It is up, but it is not as much as the raw numbers would indicate. Here's just some final thoughts on just where we're at on revenue. Past performance, it's been withholding, non-withholding, corporate, volatile tax sources that can and will change with financial markets. The deteriorating picture on the National the Governor's Advisory Council on revenue estimates comes in right before Thanksgiving, and we'll deal with this and we'll sort of try to peg a forecast that we're going to use in the budget, but this is going to be a major consideration on this. About half of the employment, maybe wage and salary growth that we expected a year ago at this time But coming off at 11 base, at higher base, you don't have to grow it so fast to get there at 12. You got 40% less, so I think we will get there because we're a third of the year percent ahead of this thing. All kinds of risk associated with the forecast, a lot of uncertainty. Major risks are on the downside. So big tail on the downside in terms of the data, which means that if you're a businessman abiding the government and see that kind of risk, what would you probably be advising them, and that is to be conservative, to go less rather than more. So the game is not with us right now in terms of 12. It is really much ahead of us. 13, when it becomes a crunch point, when the economics sort of catch up with the overall base, and then what we do about 14. Here's a budget moving into 12, and try to start with some of the demands to the bottom line here for y'all. In the current budget, there's a $265 million balance that rolls forward from 11 into 12. We get
Hello. This is not. That's okay. Have a good day. Just up there.
I was prepared to say it was the governor. I was prepared to train. You went to India, I get to go to Homestead. Yeah, 265 million roll forward from 11. So in looking at just sort of the structure of the budget, if that's what you're rolling forward into 12, initially you start with sort of and you spend it in 12, you get sort of a structural imbalance in 12 of that amount, because that's not going to be reoccurring once you spend it, unless you spend it on one-time stuff. And there is one-time stuff in 12. We say 114 million. That was reserved for the revenue stabilization fund. We've also reserved that 132 out of the surplus of this 114 will go towards the 14 deposit, which right now is at 91 million based on the official estimates. Will probably pick up a little bit if any adjustment is made on the upside of that revenue. Those are the absolute numbers. You see a supplemental report, support for K-12, this one-time appropriation that was put into 12. 87 million will do the rebasing as we move forward, but this 87 million is a one-time. And then VHEADS, that's variable health and disability services. This was the trust fund that was sort of developed to deal with community services and some of the negotiations were in with the Justice Department on intellectual disability waivers and provisions of community service, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. The notion was this was going to be a one-time payment, could possibly continue depending on where negotiations went and how they were resolved. But for this purposes, I'm showing this one time. That's what the House and Senate said in their write-up. So just a place where we're more than that. You take off the one time, 231. We've got some one-time revenue that adds to the problem because that won't be recurring at sale of Brunswick Prison, $3 million in 12. So when you make these adjustments, you get a little over $50 million in sort of a structural kinds of imbalance in the state budget if everything plays just as it was anticipated in 12. That's not very large by historical standards. We've been a lot more. The big killer is VRS and what we do with we've got the deferment, we've got to pay that back. What comes to that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The budget itself going forward is going to be shaped by a handful of items that will, everything else will compare in comparison to these. You've got on the state side of things, certainly the rebasing in K-12. You've got the Virginia retirement system, the deferral, the new rates, and I'll talk a little bit about that. State employees, no salary increases since December 2007. at the state level did get a bonus, did get 5% last year, but had to put 5% into retirement. Their bottom line pay went down right off. On the unfunded federal mandates, we find ourselves with the 15-year plan on cleanup of the bay. As I said, we reserved $50 million out of the statute actually reserved $50 million out of the revenue surplus out of the balances that could be used for that purposes. But it's about $8 billion proposition over 15 years. The real question here is who pays for it, whether it's private, feds, states, even localities. How is that all shared going forward? On federal health. 14. On federal health care reform, XSR has possessed excess of $2 billion by 2022. Here, you're going to have a huge influx in 14 in Medicaid. The feds will pick up most of those recipients, but we have recipients that we call out of the woodwork recipients that won't be covered by the federal government. And these are people that are currently eligible for Medicaid, but for one reason or not, don't take it now. As you get into the enforcement of mandatory health coverage, the assumption is that they will be forced to take that. The state will have to pick up 50% of that cost, whatever that is. Medicaid is going to go through an expansion, probably that hadn't been seen since the early 90s when we picked up children under the Medicaid program, expanded that from age 3 up to age 16. So you're going to see a lifetime. It was pretty much a bumper buster back then. It's going to be pretty much the same deal coming this time around. Regardless of the good it does, from a financial standpoint, it's a very hard thing to incorporate. Then add on to this current negotiations with DOJ on intellectual disabilities, and I don't know where that's going at this stage again. But let's say wherever it goes, it's going to cost money, whether we have an agreement or not. So here are the numbers in public education, re-benchmarking, the board's placed at $318 million. That we're looking at on the VRS rates, $600 million. That's the state share to meet the new rates in the 70% range, I think, from VRS. Composite index changes, $84 million. This became a real big issue for the General Assembly last time because there was 102 localities lost. Northern Virginia localities, the wealth measure is relative, so Northern Virginia fell in terms of real estate more than the state, which is a big component of that wealth factor that made them look relatively less wealthy. So resources started to shift towards the north in terms of the formula. The General Assembly, I think, was thought that maybe that would reverse itself as time went on. It was just a situation that was of the recession once we got back on track. That will happen. It probably will, but it's going to take long to do. And you're facing the same situation. I think it's 80-some localities will lose money in the composite index change. And funds still rules back to Northern Virginia. So the General Assembly came up with sort of a hold harmless where nobody lost last time. We'll see what happens on this. The governor had actually advocated for letting them change very clear because I was very much convinced that this could go again. It is continuing, not to the extent it was, but the scaled down version is continuing. We've got enrollment changes and sales tax to go through, but those are the big ticket items. So higher education, governor's commission. Big thing there is 100,000 new degrees, student financial assistance to offset tuition increases, investment in STEM and science, technology, engineering, and math, curricula in the schools. We have and a funding model change. The base accuracy funding model is a model that everybody agrees on when the funding is attached to it, and then nobody agrees on it. So there was an effort to try to look at the mechanics of that, try to get a consensus of what ought to drive funding of model. The State Council of Higher Education's request is about $350 million in this area. On health and human resources, Medicaid, with the FNAP coming out of the stimulus package, and then it was extended through the end of 11. What the federal government did was raise the percentage match that they would share in Medicaid. We're a 50-50 state. It went up almost to about 58%, 59% in terms of match that the federal government picked up in terms of the recession. Ours dropped. So it freed up general fund money that we'd otherwise have to put in Medicaid and be used for other purposes. During the recession, they extended that for 6 months through June 30th of 11. We normally cut Medicaid off with pay every other Friday. It runs through, so depending on the roll of dice in the calendar, it could be up to 2 weeks, cut off in June before you get to June 30th. On the payment, and what we decided, that makes no sense at all. The federal government's going to pay 60% of the bill. Why do we want to pay, 50% of it come July 1st? Let's accelerate all of that if we can in June 11, and we did. It was a big savings for us. But moving forward, we have to replace that. We don't. 12 is not a complete annual year because we need, almost a month worth of Medicaid expenditures into 11, so you've got like 11 months in 12 in the budget that has to be annualized as you go forward into 13 and 14. That's $263 million, and we're going to the general fund side for 13 and 14. And then you get just inflation utilization and again, big numbers. Sexually violent predators. We've got one facility in Ottawa County running to the brink capacity. The governor had recommended building another facility. Now it's going on hold. In the last session, JR is doing a study of that. That should get shortly, but if we do have to build another one, it's about $50 million on that. Other health and human resources, behavioral health, a lot of that depends on the outcome and DOJ recommendations. Anywhere we go, there's going to be more community services. We're going to have to do that. The real question is what happens to the state hospitals as you begin to put more and more community services back there, and whether there are savings to be had in that arena. On TANF, we've been funding programs out of balances in TANF. We don't have them anymore, so they sort of should go to the general fund because they pay for the game. And then you all are fairly familiar with the other kinds of programs there, either for CSA or health departments for child welfare. Over on the public safety side, it's been the good news, or there is any good news in the budget that at least for state responsible prisoners down versus expectations, even though that's been surprising somewhat. The real benefit has been on the local side for local prisoners that has freed up space so that there's more state responsible prisoners backed up in local jails, but we're paying the deals on that. And the sheriff seems to like that now. We do have a prison mothball, brand new. As a matter of fact, Grayson. The question is whether we bring that online. If we do, $48 million. So the sheriff's, I mentioned per diems, that would be part of all of that forecast. Other kinds of issues, the continuation of the 7-4 that was put in 11 out of the surplus, or in 12 out of the surplus from 11, in 13 and 14, continuing that, and then the new jails, the regional jails coming online, the operating costs and the staffing of those. And Commerce and Trade is the economic development deals, job creation is the other's top priority. So we have a lot of activity going on that vision to India and Israel. I think we'll see some results come out of that. In addition, we get the continuation of the BRAC, that's 15-year, that 7.5 years, 15-year deal. And then the PAC fund, the 30-year funding that surplus. Natural resources, I mentioned the water quality improvement fund, 50 million in reserves. There's about 300 million or so excess in local wastewater treatment facilities that either the planning stage coming on the line, and the state will have to pay its share of at some point as it's going. And then dam safety has become a big issue. A study added to 200 million. Surprisingly enough, there's only been 60 million of that in state property. So a lot of that is water and soil conservation private. And raises a lot of policy questions that we're trying to deal with. Statewide issues, the big one, VRS, on the state employee side, is to replace the deferral. Remember, in 2012, we referred to 2 quarters. We went back to the rates in the 4th quarter. So to annualize, to get just to the 4th quarter rate of 13 and 14 annualized, it's about 300 million over the course. And then you get to, on top of that, the board certified rates, and then we're 70 million. And the revenue stabilization fund. I've talked about, let me give you this chart of revenue stabilization fund. It's, we'll get to 440 by the end of 13. The revenue stabilization formula looks at actual revenues reflected at the end of the year, looks back 6 years, and it says, you know, what is that percentage compared to the 6 years? And if that percentage is greater than the 6 years, the average of the 6 years that you're going in the past, it says you're growing at normal, and you got to reserve 1/2 of the difference to go into the revenue stabilization fund. And that occurs when you have surplus, when you don't have it. It's all tied to what is the actual revenue growth. Let me go all the way back to this slide. And as you finish up 12, if you're going back 6 years, counting 12, you're going to go back to about 2007. So look at those numbers from 2007, 4913, -92, -0.7%, 5.8%, and whatever you have in 12. That's what's going to define what's normal for Virginia. 2 negative years, very low growth. That bar is going to be set so low that any revenue going forward when you have growth is going to look abnormal. So this mechanism, it's anti-cyclical. When you go into recession, the past looks high. You don't put any money in it. When you come out of recession, the past looks, normal compared to what you're doing. So you have to put money into it. The slope of this line is going to be much, much greater with revenue growth, if we get it, than it was in 2002. It's just the numbers that are so much lower, it's going to take so much more off of it. That is why we chose to do the whole 132 out of surplus, leave the 114 that was in the budget to take care of 14, and we already know that 91 of that is spoken for. So this could be moving forward. That's why I say easily we could have by the end of 14, 600 million in that fund. Other big ticket issues, healthcare insurance for state employees. You all know the aid to locality, the 60 million reverted liquidity account that probably nobody likes at the state game in the budget for everybody likes. Debt service, we had $1 billion worth of projects that got held up in the recession there, beginning to move now, so debt service is going to have to be built in going forward. Governor's priorities out of all of this: job creation, higher education with this vision, especially in the investment in STEM. The retirement funding is made, that wasn't his issue coming into office, but he's made it a part of the government reform package. And it is a big, big ticket item to government reform itself, continuing pressure so that the institutions, state government, on efficiency and streamlining. Okay, what does it all mean? This is all big numbers. So sort of RicBrown back of the envelope. Hot and cold. Here's this first column is the appropriation in 12 revenues and spending. And when you get to the end of 12, you can see the appropriated balances 2.1. That structural thing I talked about, the 265 you see up there, as it balanced from the prior year, it's been down to 2.1. So going forward, you don't have a balance. You've got the 2.1 plus the 114 that was in, well, the revenue stabilization budget, which we'll pay for out of the surplus. So the 114 plus that 2.1 will give you basically a start, if nothing else changes, of 116. And the adjustments to the balance are primarily the date from the RS. If we're not going to do that in the future, that's going to disappear. On the revenue side, I don't know what the revenue forecast is. We haven't decided yet. The Governor's Council hasn't even met yet. We haven't done those projections yet. But given what I see, I put in just 4.5%. Let's see what that does. You know, as an assumption. It's a little bit less than 5.8 that we have last time. That's not my forecast, but for this model, I think it works. And then on the transfer side, I just let that carry forward, sort of at where it's at. The risk is really on the downside. We have to take this interest in non-general funds. That'll mean somewhat, but that gives you about $16.9 billion in terms of resources. If you look at the operating side, you have the $87 million that will continue on the K-12 rebasing will take place. You got the revenue stabilization fund, 114 that gets loaded to the balance. You've got the intellectual disability trust fund, the $30 million. I continued that in this exercise simply because it is going to be a priority to increase community services. So rather than we have that just be another demand on the budget. And then just operating 16.8, there's no reductions in spending whatsoever. That's very base. So going forward, you have about, taking that out of the revenue, you got about 499, 500 million round numbers. Okay, just look at some of the demands. I talked about chasing that. VRS state employees, deferment at 150 in 13. And get back up to that annualization of 4 quarter rates. Another 285, up to 285 if you pay the board approved rates. On teachers, 300 million, that's our share of it. That's going up. And the liability on teachers is greater than on the state employee side. On Medicaid, the base budget utilization, we're in the $300 million range. And then base rebasing on K-12 at 318, 145 first year. You can see you run out of gas pretty quickly. And that is what I started with, a handful of things going to shake this budget at the stage of the beginning. There's no, even if it's 8%, rather than 48% revenue growth, which I don't think it's going to be. There's going to be some squeezes here because the big ticket items are outstripping our ability on the resource side to deal with them. So here are my concluding thoughts, and then I'll take some questions on it. The economic picture is deteriorating. A lot more probability of a double dip. I'm very worried about what happens at Washington. It doesn't do its business in terms of the political Virginia in the bond markets. Not so much that makes, I think, a big difference to us in the markets from a tradition, from Christian point of view. Nobody wants it to happen on their watch. But Virginia paper trades is as good as it ever did, if not better, at this stage of the game. And we don't see any relief from this. Even the forecasting companies that are more optimistic for 9-10 months before it begins to get better. So you've got this period at least that will define us through 12 into the early part of 13. Probably not a lot of certainty when we have to introduce the budget. We probably not know exactly what Washington's going to do. We really won't know whether that turnaround 8-9 months out is going to happen or not. So the pressure could be downside. There's a lot of downside risk. On the revenue side, we don't need to grow as much in 12. To get to the forecast, we'll get there. There'll be rollover to 13. The question is how much and what can we do. On the 12 side of things, there, because of this uncertainty, there is a greater need for liquidity, and you can see my fussing with the federal government here. Because I can blame them. Number one, they're going to take money off of the table that otherwise would be used, I think, for local programs we have to reserve because of the uncertainty. On the bond rating firm front, that works well with them. You see my smiley face. If there's any bond ratings in the room, I'm not taking a fight with you. But to satisfy both of those elements, reserves are going to be in order. And we'll meet that, and we'll probably get there between the Revenue Stabilization Fund. In fact, Moody's published something, I don't really have to do this in Virginia, to reserve $50 million. In fact, we did 30. I don't know whether that was their ask or not, but we'll see. The better thing is that there will be more into that fund than less. The slower growth is going to squeeze the budget in 13, not in 12. Come off that base. The economics catch up with us in 13. And that's where everything starts to squeeze, and that's where some of these big ticket items start to come into play. According to the governor's call for 2.46%, it was on the mark. Even though we're growing, we're not back losing money. We are going to need flexibility to deal with some of these big ticket items and shape the budget. If we are successful in 13 and shaping 13, we'll largely, with ongoing cuts with ongoing resources, we'll basically solve the problem in 13. So it is as hit in 13, we get back in 14. And needless to say, I mean, started with this one of the most difficult budgets, I think, that I've seen in my career. It is going to be very, very difficult to shape this thing. There's going to be something for everybody in this life, including myself. But I'm reminded, my wife reminded me after retired, so everybody shows. And the final point is it's going to take skill to get through this. It's going to take luck. And we're going to need it both on the local side, on the state side, and on the federal side in terms of cooperation. So those are my thoughts. I'll take some questions. Yes.
First of all, thank you for a very good presentation and the slides there. The question I have is that it's very troubling at the local level to have state politicians without senators and members of the assembly and talk about how they prepare a budget without raising taxes. A lot of that is done, it hasn't gone down to the locality, so everybody's share the expenses or coming down and saying, okay, we pay it for that. That's the special trouble for me. At some point, I think we'll get money back. Plus the boost card. All of these things are very difficult to deal with. Are you getting any kind of indication on your part that there's going to be any look at new revenues to try and help with this situation?
Yeah, I don't see did run on that. So I think you're looking at there's a JR study that was added to the use of tax preferences and tax credits and those kinds of things, and to what extent they're used and whether they should be continued or not. I think I have probably some interest in that area from various schools. Actually, JRP is sort of recommended that there be a subcommittee sort of formed in the General Assembly on an ongoing basis for finance to look at those things. So there's some interest in that area, but tax increases, I just don't. I don't see anything in the last election that say that that's in the offering to say. Other questions?
Rick, I got a question. How important is raising the retirement rates to bond rates
to say at this stage, but they have struggled with that. They were in sort of the midst of trying to establish their policy going forward on unfunded liabilities and how much it adds, subtracts to the bottom of the line, and the way you run all the stuff the federal government does. So they were trying to deal with two things in that. My sense of it is that I was a little bit surprised that they took it was about I think they took it from the firm. I expected more pushback, didn't get actually very understanding of that. And, they want to see it repaid, yeah. I mean, they want a little long haul. But there's some other things that Virginia has on the gap base, but we still have to have some gap base. We look at accrued liabilities and just the general account. They'd like to see that fixed. I think that's probably more of a priority to them. So all these things sort of add to a list that don't help you, but the good news is that we're not nearly as bad as some of the other states. I mean, there's a few reports that North Carolina, and few reports that North Carolina looks wonderful in terms of 90% funding compared to Virginia. We're not there. We're sitting at 70% funding in the state of the problem is they're not there. North Carolina pays health insurance for retirees. Tremendous liabilities in it. The Monterey firms look at that. They don't look at one piece of the action and say, Virginia, you're not well. They look at the whole picture. And when you do that, Virginia looks pretty good. I mean, what I get is you guys do it, and you do it consistently, and you look pretty good on paper. So they probably give us a little bit more. They're much more concerned about the federal government and the underpinnings of the Virginia economy at this stage of the beginning than they were about the management fiscal management. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Tom Shepard from New York County. I want to make sure I understand something here. It says in the natural resource water quality that's the TDL. I believe the state's on the hook for about $6.5 billion for 14 years. It's supposed to kick in after this second phase 2. Okay, your county's a small county, 65,000 people, and we're going to shell out $100 million for our share of it. Where's the state? I mean, people in York County and along the edge of the bay are not the only ones that kind of added to the pollution. I thought the whole state had participated in all the revenue that came out of the transportation.
On the non-point side, the state will be on schedule. On the point side, as I mentioned, that at this stage we gave about $300 million. It's up there. We did a couple of years ago a $250 million bond package to pay part of the problem from the wastewater side. That spending has a long tail on it. You can't just rush the markets and try to fund all that without having some federal arbitrage consequences. So we have to work through this very carefully. The other constraint, at least at this period of time, is maybe watch. I'm not anxious to do a lot in terms of that. My advice to the governor is to shy away from it at this stage. And so I think it will be there. I think we have some other mechanisms, like I said, on the non-point side, at least for the binding company, that will meet our obligations for 13 and 14. Going down the road, I think that government's a little bit steeper. Yes, sir.
The governor requested information from localities about unfunded mandates, etc. Is he then going to use that as a way, if it does come down to cutting aid to localities, of relieving localities of requirements?
I think the governor would like to cut state mandates, whether they're connected to funding or not. he's got his policy report on that, brings it up time to time, meetings. The other review, you get into the funding situations, the lack of funding policy, those kinds of things. I mean, he wants to see some solid evidence that the state makes localities do things, but he's very much in favor of taking action on those and trying to streamline whatever he can. And I think you'll see, I mean, he has asked and asked over and over for those, and I think you'll see to the extent that he has that inventory, and I think being on VACo have presented some things to him. I think you'll see him acting on this. Others? Thank you.
Real quickly, Rick said we need luck and skill. We're lucky to have him in the Commonwealth after 41 years. I'm sure there are at least another 10, right? And obviously, he has the skill and the acting he has difficult times. Rick's presentation will get on the VACo website. By the time we get back to the camera, you should be able to download that. So some of the students are taking notes, anything like that, with the print on the website. Lunch is served 12:45 to 2 p.m. down the hall, box lunch. The sessions begin at 1:45. On page 40 in your book, if you want to see where we're at. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Sir. Yeah. You got most of it.